Build a Better Book Trailer. Welcome to How to Build a Better Book Trailer. My name is Elle Palmer. My actual name is Laura Palmer, and if you are familiar with the show Twin Peaks, which is about finding the person who murdered Laura Palmer, you can see why I used my first initial as my writing name. I am the author of 2 books, The True Bride and the Shoemaker and The Lady and the Frog. These are the first 2 books in the Pippington Tales, which is a series set where the magic of Once Upon a Time combines with the setting of Downton Abbey. So why am I doing a training on book trailers? Well, another thing about myself is I have a double major in English and film from the University of California, Santa Barbara, one of the top party schools in the nation. I know a lot of us get really excited about putting together a trailer or visual representation of our book that's going to get people really excited to pick up our book and buy it. However, one of the big problems we have is that we are writers. We think about the world in more of a text medium than a visual medium. And the problem with that is that our book trailers tend to be very text heavy. They tend to be focused on, we need to tell the whole story because we're a writer and we have to create the whole scene on there. And so how can we make this a more visual, a more engaging, and a more viral book trailer? I have 1 or 2 examples of really great book trailers. I have some examples I put together of some really terrible book trailers, and hopefully we can at least make something in between. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about before you begin even putting together your images and content for your book trailer, what do you need to know? What do you need to think about? Then I'm going to talk about pre-production, planning it out. This is like when you're outlining your book. You need to plan it out before you spend a lot of time on it. Then we're going to talk about the actual production or creation of your book trailer, followed with, now that you've done your book trailer, what do you do with it? Because of course, it's going to be a brilliant work of art that would win an Oscar for great short films by the time we're done. Before you begin, think about how will your trailer help you build your brand. Your trailer is a marketing tool. And a lot of times, we as writers get really excited because we love movie trailers. And now, there's a movie trailer for my book! While that's very cool, before you begin, you need to think about what is your brand? And how is your book trailer reflecting your brand? How does it connect with the other marketing that you're doing? The second thing you need to think about is what is your skill level? So if your skill level is very low, you need to do a simple trailer. If your skill level is high, go for the more creative and exciting things. I'm going to try to show a couple examples of both by the end. So another thing to consider is, what is your return on investment of time and funds? How much money do you want to spend? How much time do you want to spend? And how much value will this trailer add to your marketing compared with how much time it takes? Specifically for this tutorial, I went ahead and made a decent but not amazing trailer to use as an example, and it probably, between gathering the footage, planning it out, and editing it to a level that I was happy with it, took 3 to 5 hours. And that's for a 45-second trailer. But just think, if you are even doing a 30-second trailer, you're probably going to invest at least a couple hours. So think about, how much time do you want to spend for a 45-second trailer? So what is your return on investment in time and funds? Watch your time carefully. Film takes a lot more time than most people realize. So now we've talked about how much time it takes to build a film trailer. Now we need to look at your level of difficulty. So the more you add to the trailer, the harder it can be. So simpler is easier and complex is harder. I don't think this is a new concept for everybody, but a lot of times when we decide to make a book trailer, and I know I do this with my own book trailers and stories of, and we could add this, and we could add that, and we could make it shiny, and then it will be amazing. Okay, it might be amazing but you might also have to spend like a whole week on a 30-second trailer, and would have been better to spend that week trying to get your novel closer to publication. So simpler equals easier, more equals harder. To help you think about how complex you want to make your project of creating your book trailer, I put together this list of what you can do. So if you just do a slideshow of royalty-free images, that's fairly simple, pretty easy to put together, and that's why most book trailers are a form of a slideshow, because it's a lot easier than otherwise. The next level up is if you can find some stock video that will go with it. It looks cool, but it's really hard to find something that will work, and you're pretty much going to be stuck with time lapses on landscapes of looking very shiny but having very little to do with your actual book story. So all of these are kind of a give and take of how much you want to do. You can do it yourself video footage, which is a lot more complicated. If you have more advanced skills or you have someone that can help you, that's great. If you don't, you might want to start with something simpler and then build up to that as you work on doing more book trailers. Once you add narration to any one of the above, you're adding complications, because you're going to have to record yourself into a microphone like I'm doing now, go through and scrub the audio to make it clean, edit the audio down to the core of what you want to do, and then add it to the book trailer. So once you do all of that, that adds a lot of complications to what you're trying to do. It can be very cool if you have a good voiceover, if you're able to do a lot of emoting and have a great voice. But if you don't have those skills, maybe you can get somebody else to do it, or maybe you could go and practice those skills. Taking an acting class, doing Toastmasters, practicing might be all good ways to practice that. This is a side plug. Toastmasters would be good for any author who's uncomfortable with public speaking, because being able to do public speaking as an author is a great way to go out there and to network and meet people that might be able to help you promote your book, so that way you can become as world famous as I am, because apparently I've sold 2 ebooks in England. Yes, I am that world famous. I think I've made about $1. The next thing we need to think about is the film does not equal a novel. I'm sure you understand that intellectually, but once again, we as writers look at the world from a very text-based, word-based sort of view. And film is a much more visual medium, especially when you are on social media. So now we have to take our brain and shift a little bit to think about it, the visuals first and the text second. So we need to think about our images are primary. So if you go on Facebook, there's a lot of videos now that have closed caption or someone holding handwritten poster boards or things like that, because people will look at Facebook but not actually click on a video to listen to it. It'll start running and people will watch it. So by having some sort of caption or text, you can communicate that message, but just think about your images are going to capture the audience a lot faster than the text. The next thing you need to think about is the audio. If your audio is tricky and doesn't sound good, a lot of people will turn away. So once they click on the video and are actually listening to it, you want decent audio to go with your good images. The last thing is the text. What you are saying, what you're writing on the screen, it will help convey the message, but the images need to go with that, and it needs to create a cohesive whole. All of these together are building the story that you're telling in your book trailer. So now we've gone over things you need to think about before you start. So we're going to talk about how to do it. Along the way, I'm going to give a few examples of some good, some okay, and some terrible trailers. The okay and terrible I have made myself because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I'm sure whoever made the trailers that are similar to what I'm going to show worked hard on them and just were doing the best they could with what they had. Before you start putting together your trailer, your options are you can hire someone to do it, and that can get very expensive very quickly, but it saves you a lot of time and you just put money out there. So if you have the funds to do that, that might be a good way to go. There's a growing number of book trailer making companies that you might want to think about using. You can ask a friend who actually knows what they're doing. It could be one of your kids. It could be an acquaintance, a family member, just somebody who knows filmmaking better than you do, who's excited about your book and is willing. They might be able to put something cool that you're not quite expecting. And the final option is to do it yourself. So obviously, we're going to follow the do-it-yourself option. First of all, you need to figure out what software are you using on your computer. You can make a trailer on PowerPoint. You can take and just do a slideshow, record some narration over it, and render that to video at the end. It's not a great option, but if you have no clue what you are doing, it's a lot better than no book trailer at all. So I highly recommend that if you have no idea what you're doing, just want something simple to put out there and have online. You can also use an app. I tried one called Animoto. It's okay, and if you have no clue what you're doing, it's pretty good, but you're going to have a watermark on it, so there's going to be the Animoto branding on that, which will be kind of awkward if you're trying to put yourself out there as a professional. I prefer Adobe Spark. Adobe Spark is super easy. You just drop some videos in. You can adjust the timing. There's a little bit of adjusting you could do, but if you have no clue what you're doing, you can pretty much just drop some text and images and video in there. They have stock footage and stock music you can drop in. It will automatically populate the attribution. You can put together a decent, not amazing, but decent trailer in like half an hour to an hour at the most. Very quick, pretty easy. So here's just a sample of the trailer I put together. I've done a couple trailers for a short story I did in an anthology called Fantastic Creatures by the Fellowship of Fantasy, which is clean, independent fantasy authors. And the story is Priscilla, the Magnificent Flying Giant Squid. And here's just a little bit of her incredible and inspiring story. Once upon a time, there was a giant squid named Priscilla. All Priscilla wanted to do was learn how to fly. And she used her new language to meet an engineer who would build a dirigible. The engineer worked hard, and it took many months of work, but they were able to build the dirigible as promised. At last, Priscilla climbed into a glass cage, and the dirigible pulled her up into the sky, and she was finally able to fly. So whenever your dreams seem too far away, just look up in the sky and see Priscilla, that magnificent flying giant squid. So once again, with that trailer, all I did was drop in a little bit of audio. My narration isn't great, but I was just kind of playing around. Dropped in the audio, dropped in images that they already had. None of those images I have on my computer. I just dropped them in from what's internally on the software. It was completely free, has attributions at the end, and you can upload it to YouTube. Very cool little program. So if you want something fancier than a PowerPoint, doesn't take a lot of work, still looks pretty cool, I would highly recommend Adobe Spark. Animoto is okay. Adobe Spark is fantastic. Your final option is a desktop program. Now with a desktop program, you have a lot more options, but with a lot more options and flexibility comes a lot more of knowing what you're doing. So with programs you can use, there's iMovie. iMovie's pretty good. There's Windows Movie Maker. It's pretty simple. Windows Movie Maker drives me a little bit crazy because I've done more advanced filmmaking, and the lack of options and flexibility really frustrating when I'm trying to put stuff together after I've used a fancier software. However, the learning curve for fancier software, and I'm talking about things like Adobe Premiere, Corel Video Studio, Sony Movie Studio, Sony Vegas is the higher end of Sony Movie Studio. Things like that have that are a more robust program do more in, and you have more control over. You can do multiple tracks and things like that, which with the higher end programs, even at the consumer level, you have a lot more options you can do, but it takes a much higher learning curve to figure out how to use it and how to. I've used Sony Movie Studio for the last probably about 10, 12 years. I don't do video editing a ton, but because I've used the software enough, I can navigate it pretty quickly. Another thing you need to do is plan your video. And so then you can gather your resources, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But first you need to make a script or a storyboard. What is a mini story you can tell visually? So this is the trailer that we're going to be putting together over the course of this video. So here we have, this is the blurb for my book. Welcome to Pippington, where motor cars bump down old city lanes, frogs transform into men, and mermaids just might be real. Evelyn Havish is through waiting for Henry Kingston to look up from his ledgers and propose. But when Henry's brother Jack is transformed into a frog and trapped in a well, Evelyn must join the rescue. Armed with her training as a lady and a solid punch, Evelyn must outwit a scheming heiress, wrestle an octopus, and kiss far more frogs than a girl should be expected to. As she dives deeper into a hidden world of magic, she discovers Jack may not be the one who needs saving. I think it's a great blurb. It's lively, it's exciting, it's fun, but it's not a great script for a book trailer. And that's because there's too many words. Film is not the same as writing. And so with this being text, we've got to cut it down. So let's take a look at this. So we're going to time-lapse forward a little bit. So we don't need details of who Jack is, so we're going to change it to save a man transformed into a frog. And notice I just deleted half of my blurb. So we just took our blurb down to two key sentences. And then I've broken it up into individual lines. And now I'm going to take those lines and I'm playing around with the font. So you want a good font for when you're putting the text in your video. Like I said, this is for a very simple video. You're going to want... so my choices are Garamond, Futura, Gil Sans, not Times New Roman, Garamond, come on me, Futura, Gil Sans, or Century Gothic. All of those are going to be good fonts. Garamond is a serif font, so that means it has a little ornamentation at the end. Sans serif means it doesn't have, if you look at the T, there's kind of lines at the end of the T. That's what the serif is. If you do a sans serif, it doesn't do that. I'm choosing Garamond because that's kind of what I use for my branding. The things that I make, I tend to try to do a Garamond-esque font because it's very readable, but it has an older feeling to it, and that goes with what my book is. So now we're going to take, and now that we've set up our font, we've chosen what we're going to say. It was probably going to be edited even further. We're going to go through and we're going to drop that in, and we'll fast forward with that a little bit. One thing I've looked at is now that I've dropped one in, if we go back, there's about 13 letters in the first one, and there's 20 lines. So now I want to make there's 13 unit spaces, there's 13 letter spaces. So now I'm going to make it so it's pretty unified with that length as I go across. That makes about 20 lines, and we're going to kind of drop that into our movie studio software. And here we're just copying and pasting into here so you can kind of see what that looks like. This is not the final version. We're going to add some effects to that later. And my computer crashed, so when I recorded this, I changed the font so it was golden color, and so it has kind of some shadowing and outlining, so that way when it's over an image you can still see it, because readability is super important. So there's kind of a sample of putting the text in and planning that out. So now we've done that, We've planned out our text. Now we're going to pull some images. As you pull images, you need to be aware of what's called the Creative Commons. Creative Commons is super useful, but there's a couple different attributions. I'm not going to go over all of those for the purpose of this, but there's ones where you don't have to attribute it to someone, and there's some where you do. So make sure you look at what the licensing is, make sure it's clear, and make sure you follow that. Make sure that you attribute things that should be attributed. For audio, you have your narration. You can have a friend do some audio if you know someone who does composing of some kind, or plays piano, or is really good at an instrument. That's probably the best way to go, because you're guaranteed that you're not going to be breaking any copyright. The second best option is YouTube actually has, so if you go into where you can manage your videos, at the bottom it has a video creator, and it has what its music policies are. You can look up copyrighted songs that you can use. The problem I have with those, if the owner of that copyright decides to pull it from YouTube at some point, they're going to either make your video so it can't be viewed, or make it so that audio is out. And so all of your hard work is kind of broken. So you're much better off going with, if you go down a little bit, there's a section they have which has music that you can use that is copyright free. And so make sure you follow the rules, whether it's attribution or non-attribution. It's not amazing music, but it's a more limited list. You can go spend hundreds of hours online trying to find free music you can use. Most of it's pretty cheesy because it's free, but you can find something pretty decent that'll work if you look around a little bit. You can do the same thing with video. There's actually a pretty good amount of royalty-free video you can do. It's just a matter of how much time do you want to spend looking for these things. Are you going to generate this yourself? So with audio, now if you want to record your own narration, you want a good microphone. If you don't have a great microphone, just use a headset like a Bluetooth headset, or one that comes with your iPod, that's old school, with your iPhone that has a microphone built into the headset that has pretty good sound. It's not going to be amazing, but it'll get the job done. I'm doing this with a Blue Yeti microphone, which is a little bit fancier. I got this off eBay some years ago for like $80. If you don't want to spend that much, then other options are great, but this has been a really great microphone, and you can hear, well, I like how I hit it just now. You can hear how good it sounds. The video earlier that I did on Adobe Spark was with my computer microphone. So here's just a quick snippet of that one. The first thing Priscilla did was learn Morse code from some passing mermaids. So if you're creating your own audio, you want to use a program that will, if you're creating your own audio, you want to use a program that you can edit your audio in. I highly recommend Audacity. It is a free program. There's some YouTube videos on how to use that. I'd highly recommend checking that out if you want to learn more. But for the purpose of this, just make sure your audio sounds decent and doesn't have weird things going on in the background. Using a decent microphone and being in a quiet room, particularly a large closet, will help a lot with that, because that'll help kind of dampen the sound and eliminate outdoor sounds. If you're going to create your own video footage, remember that is an entire other process. Just some basic things. One, make sure your lighting is decent. You can use a clip-on lamp, like a desk lamp, to highlight the shadows in the room so you kind of have a better look to it. Plan your camera work. iPhones and high-end Android phones have great cameras on them now. Use a selfie stick or something like that, and you can get a pretty steady shot. If you don't have something to keep it steady, then make it look like you do it on purpose. A lot of action scenes use handheld cameras. That's where we get really jerky footage. It makes it more actionated. If you make it look like you did it on purpose, nobody will be the wiser. So just kind of go with it and make all of your accidents happy accidents. Another thing, if you don't know a lot about camera work, keep it simple. Keep one steady shot. Because most cameras now are HD, you can use your software to actually zoom in on the image and be able to use that to create a close-up or things like that. Panning is a little bit different. If you want to create a panoramic shot, then you will need to turn the camera. But if you're just doing straight on shot, just do the flat shot and go into the editor and you can use that to zoom in instead of doing it in camera. Because if you do it in camera, you can't change that, and that's problematic. Also, if you're doing a time lapse, keep your cameras still. Doing video on your own is very difficult unless you're doing just like a vlog sort of video where it's just you and your web camera. But if you're doing more than that, ask for help. That's why films have crews. Use actors if possible. If you can afford them, if you have a friend who's a pretty good actor and willing to do it for free, that's great. It depends on what you want to do. It's as creative as you want to get and as fancy as you want to get, you can do, but think it through. There's a great website called nofilmschool.com that has a lot of pointers on some basic things. That's more aiming for professional level film work, but there's some good tips you can pick up from that. Watch some YouTube videos on how to do it. Check it out. As I mentioned earlier, this video is not to direct you to do that, but I am going to show you what I think is a great example of shooting your own footage, keeping it simple. This is something you can do by yourself. So this is a great book trailer. Let's watch this real quick. I think it's a great example. What works really well for this trailer is that we have a white, clean background that's not distracting. We have a very simple concept, but there is a great amount of tension being built throughout the thing. We're watching that balloon explode, or that glove being blown up, and we know that it's going to blow up, but we don't know when. And the author's face when it blows up is really funny. So it fits the tone of the book, it fits the branding of the author, and it is just a really fun, something that sticks with you sort of thing. None of my trailers are this good. I would love to make a trailer this clever. I'm thinking of ideas, so I want to give props to this author because I think this is a great, simple trailer that we can use as a model for putting together something that's a little more creative than the traditional sort of slideshow trailer. However, the slideshow trailer is common because it's easier, and that's what we're going to focus on for this particular presentation. So now we have our images or slides we're going to drop in. You already have your text set up. Have your images set up, have them planned out in order of how they're going to go, because then you also want to make sure you track your attributions and make sure to include that. Editing is the part that's probably the most important. This is where I would caution you the most. As a new filmmaker, many people get really excited about the very shiny and swirly transitions that you can do in editing software. These transitions look cheap and make your trailer kind of cheesy. So when you're editing, it should be invisible and it should be consistent. In the software I use, I really only use 2 types of transitions, or when you're crossing one image with another to transition to the next image. I really only use crossfades and slides. And then I'm consistent on which one I do. I really only use slides if I'm doing something that's more current and more fast-paced. I use fades or crossfades for pretty much everything else, especially when you're going for a slower pace. You can find your own methods for doing it, but again, I would highly caution you before you do the transitions that are super shiny that allow your video to twirl and to tap dance and to throw a parade all for itself. So when you're cutting between an image or a video and you're changing that, make that edit invisible. The key to a good film is that people shouldn't be sitting there thinking, oh yeah, that edit is so cool, or that cinematography is so cool. You should be making it so all that is invisible and is just a tool for helping you tell the story as best you can. I already talked about text a little bit. They're text to be readable. Readability is far more important than prettiness. Similar to the fancy transitions that everybody likes to play with, a lot of people also like to have fancy and swirly fonts. Now, if you've looked at good covers, if you've looked at good graphic design, you will notice that the fonts are very readable, look pretty good, but don't call a lot of attention to themselves. That's again where if you look at the T and it doesn't have a little piece hanging down, it's just a straight line, like on this slide, this is a sans serif font. This one is Century Gothic. Century Gothic, Gill Sans, Futura are all great fonts. There's a couple other that look great, but that gives you 3 to work with. And it should stand out from the background. So if you look, one thing that I've done on our trailer that we've been putting together is I went in, I changed the color to kind of a golden sort of color because that matches the font on the cover of my books. It's a little closer to that. It's a little easier to read. I actually added a outline to it, so it's pretty subtle, so most of the time you won't notice it. And I added a shadow and I blurred the shadow so you don't really notice the shadow either. However, it really helps the text stand out from the image. And so let me show you an example. Let me talk about one more thing, and then I'm going to show you an example of what not to do. I cannot tell you how much fun I had making that terrible example, but we'll get to that in a second. So the next thing with editing is you're going to have panning. And this gets a little bit more technical. So panning is where your camera, and I'm just going to pan across this slide just as an example. Panning is where it takes, and it looks like the camera is gliding across an image. And what that does when you have still images is it creates the illusion of movement, so it makes it look like, oh, look how fancy this is. Look how much video is going on. So I'm going to pan across. I'm just going to do a quick pan across this slide so that way you get a view of that. In software like Windows Movie Maker, you can do that automatically. In this software, I actually have to do what's called keyframes, and that's where you basically have at this point it's at this image, and at this point area of the image, and at this point it's at this area of the image, and then we glide, and then it automatically takes it across. So that way and kind of does the stuff in between as we go across the image, so it looks like, again, that we have that illusion of movement. Then you're going to composite it together. You're going to use your multiple tracks if you are using a fancier software. Have a separate track for your narration. Have a separate track for your music. And make sure that your narration can be heard over your music. Because there's a lot of times with people who don't know how to use film editing software where your music is louder than your narration. And you can do some fancy stuff where you actually do what's called ducking, where whenever somebody is talking, that the music is at one level and then it goes down and then it comes back up. But that's very technical. So we're not going to show an example of that, but please make sure that your narration, if you choose to use narration, is louder than your music. The other thing you want to think about is rendering. That's where you're going to either export your movie or render. Rendering takes time. So this is where you're going to get up from your computer and go feed your child after you've been spending the last 3 days making this book trailer. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes for a 45-second video to render. So the longer your video is, the more time it takes to render. Also, when you upload to YouTube, that also takes time. Watch your file size. These can be pretty big. So watch your file size and make sure that it's at 720 pixels or 1040 pixels. Those are HD. That's pretty standard nowadays for online videos because you're probably going to be uploading this to YouTube and then using that link to put it on your website or wherever you're doing it. So that's what we're going to talk about sharing. So you're going to put it on social media. You're going to send it to your friends and family and say, hey, look, I made a big book trailer and it's so cool. On screen at your book signing, on your website, or in guest blogs, anywhere that you can think of to share your book trailer because you've done a lot of work on it. You've done all this work. Make it awesome. So now we're going to go back to, here's a little bit more of a behind the scenes look of the trailer that I put together for this video. So we're going to kind of test it out. This is how this looks so far. So I just wanted to put this together so you can kind of see it in action. So I'm checking things. I'm changing the length of things. I'm playing, if you look, I'm doing a lot of crossfades. I'm playing with the images. I think I have an example in here. Okay, so here I'm going in and I'm adding keyframes so that's a keyframe there. And then now I'm changing it, and so it's going to focus there for the final thing. I'm moving that so that way. So this is going to create what we talked about with panning. So there we go. There's your sample. Okay, I'm liking the look of that. Now we're going to move on to the next section. We're going to add a fade at the end, a fade at the other end, and then we're going to go on to the next section. We're going to bring those together. Okay, do I like that composition? It's pretty good. There's stuff you need to learn of like using the rule of thirds. So you're basically like, if you picture the Brady Bunch squares where there's 9 squares, that's using the rule of thirds. There's 3 and then there's 3. So you're going to use that as kind of a format. There's kind of your sample behind the scenes work. And we're going to look at the final version. I'm not super thrilled with the final version, but it's a pretty good example of something that's pretty simple, doesn't take a ridiculous amount of time to do, and is something that's pretty effective in telling your story. So one thing I haven't really talked about is pacing. So make sure you look at your pacing, make sure it's not kind of plodding and slow or going too fast. You kind of get a feeling for it. And similar to anything you write, get somebody else to look at it. Get some critical feedback. Use that to improve, and hopefully your final product will be better. And the final thing I want to leave you with is have fun with it. Go ahead and do it if you want to. I have a 5-minute mockumentary that I made that is meant to show kind of the world of the book. Very silly. I do a very poor Winston Churchill impersonation in it to do the narrator's voice. But I laughed so much while I was working it, and I hope that you kind of have fun too. So if you go on my channel, that's the True Bride and the Shoemaker.
My fellow sisters, we have suffered too long, bound and enslaved to ideals which have no base. I call upon you now, women of Pippington, to unburden yourself and set your feet free. Letitia Hampnell, Mistress of Talcourt.
It's not a super effective trailer because it's too long, but it's been something fun. I giggled a lot, and so I think it was worth the time. So think about it as a marketing tool, but have fun. So I hope all of these skills kind of help you out and kind of help you think about how you want to build a book trailer. If you need any further advice, feel free to email me. My contact info is lpalmer@lpalmerchronicles.com. And also, if you go onto my website, I'm going to upload a PDF of the PowerPoint I used. There's some additional resources on there that you can use for finding images and software you can use and things like that. And I hope you have a great time at the rest of the LDS Beta Readers 2nd Annual Conference. So thanks for listening. I hope this has been interesting and useful, and I hope you've had a good time with this writing conference. A lot of people have worked hard to put this together, and I'm really grateful for their work, and I hope you have a great day.
How to build a better book trailer.